The helicopter blades chopped through the desert air as Sarah Martinez pressed her hands against the wounded SEAL's chest. Blood seeped through her fingers despite the pressure bandage she had applied moments earlier. The young soldier's breathing was shallow, his face pale under the harsh cabin lights. "How much longer?" She called out to the pilot over the roar of the engines. 10 minutes to base," came the reply. Sarah had been working as a civilian medic contractor for 3 months now. The job paid well, and she needed the money after her discharge from the military 2 years ago. What she hadn't expected was how quiet she would become around the elite soldiers she now served alongside. The wounded SEAL, Johnson, opened his eyes and looked at her. "You're new," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Just focus on breathing," Sarah replied, checking his pulse. Her voice was steady, professional. She had learned to keep her emotions locked away, especially around these men who seemed to thrive on danger and brotherhood. Johnson studied her face. "You handle blood pretty well for a civilian contractor." Sarah didn't respond. She simply adjusted his IV drip and continued monitoring his vitals. The truth was she had seen far worse than this. But that was a life she had left behind, and she preferred to keep it that way. The base came into view below them, its lights cutting through the darkness of the Afghan night. Sarah had been stationed here for weeks now, and while the SEALs respected her medical skills, she remained an outsider. She ate alone, worked alone, and spoke only when necessary. "Martinez, you did good up there," Lieutenant Commander Blake said as they wheeled Johnson into the medical tent. Blake was the team leader, a man in his early 30s with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Just doing my job, sir," Sarah replied, already cleaning up her equipment. Blake watched her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something about the way she moved, the way she handled herself under pressure that reminded him of someone, but he couldn't place it. Over the next few days, Sarah continued her routine. She treated minor injuries, conducted medical checks, and prepared for missions. The SEALs began to trust her competence, but she remained distant. During meals, she sat apart from their loud conversations about past missions and family back home. "She's like a ghost," Petty Officer Davis commented one evening as they watched Sarah eat alone in the corner of the mess tent. "Barely says 2 words. Maybe she's just shy," suggested Rodriguez, the team's youngest member. "Shy people don't usually sign up to work in combat zones," Blake observed, still studying Sarah from across the room. What the SEALs didn't know was that Sarah's silence came from a deep place of loss and guilt. Every time she heard their stories of missions and brotherhood, it reminded her of what she had lost. The family she could never return to, the life that had been ripped away from her. That night, as Sarah lay in her small quarters, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant sound of gunfire from a training exercise. The sounds transported her back to another place, another time, when she wore a different uniform and carried different responsibilities. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, worn photograph. In it, she stood with her own team, all of them smiling and proud in their combat gear. But 3 of the 4 faces in that photo were now gone, and the 4th, herself, was trying to forget they ever existed. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly tucked the photo away and opened the door to find Blake standing there with a cup of coffee. "Thought you might be awake," he said. "Mind if I come in?" Sarah hesitated but stepped aside. Blake entered her sparse quarters and looked around. No personal items, no decorations, nothing that would indicate who she really was. "You know, the team's been talking," Blake said, settling into the single chair. "They think you don't like them." "I'm not here to make friends," Sarah replied, sitting on her cot. "I'm here to do a job." "Fair enough. But in this line of work, trust matters. And trust comes from knowing the people you work with." Sarah met his gaze. "You know everything you need to know about me. I'm qualified, I'm competent, and I keep people alive. That should be enough." Blake studied her face in the dim light. There was something in her eyes, a hardness that came from experience, the kind of experience that civilian contractors usually didn't have. "Where did you serve?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Sarah felt her chest tighten. "I never said I served. You didn't have to. It's in the way you move, the way you handle weapons when you think no one's looking, the way you assess threats. You're military. Or you were." Sarah stood up abruptly. "I think you should go." Blake didn't move. "Whatever happened, whatever brought you here, it doesn't have to define you. This team, we take care of our own." "I'm not one of your own," Sarah said firmly. "I'm a contractor." "Nothing more." Blake finally stood and moved toward the door. You know, Johnson asked about you today. Wanted to thank the medic who saved his life. I told him you were just doing your job. But between you and me, I've seen a lot of medics work under pressure. What you did up there, that wasn't just training. That was experience. After he left, Sarah sat back down on her cot and buried her face in her hands. She had worked so hard to build walls around her past, but Blake's questions were starting to crack those barriers. She couldn't afford to let them see who she really was. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, and some wounds were too deep to heal. Outside her window, she could hear the SEALs laughing around a small fire, sharing stories and building the bonds that would keep them alive in combat. Sarah envied their easy camaraderie, but she knew she could never be part of it. Her war was different, and she would fight it alone, just as she had been doing for the past 2 years. 3 weeks had passed since Johnson's rescue, and the SEAL team had settled into a rhythm with their quiet medic. Sarah continued to maintain her professional distance, but small cracks were beginning to show in her carefully constructed walls. It started during a routine patrol preparation. Sarah was checking medical supplies when she overheard Rodriguez talking about his younger sister back home. She's only 19, but she wants to join the army, Rodriguez was saying to Davis. I keep telling her it's not a place for someone like her. Sarah's hand stilled on the bandages she was counting. Without looking up, she spoke quietly. Why, because she's a woman? The conversation in the tent stopped. It was the first time Sarah had voluntarily joined one of their discussions. Rodriguez turned to her, surprised. Well, no, I mean, it's just dangerous, you know? Combat zones aren't what? Sarah asked, finally looking up. Her dark eyes held a challenge that made Rodriguez shift uncomfortably. I just worry about her, he said defensively. Maybe you should worry about whether she's strong enough and smart enough. Not about her gender, Sarah replied before returning to her supplies. Blake, who had been listening from across the tent, felt that familiar nagging sensation again. There was something in the way Sarah had spoken, with the confidence of someone who had personal experience with the subject. Later that day, the team received orders for a night raid on a suspected weapons cache. As they prepared their gear, Sarah methodically packed her medical kit. She had been on several missions now, and each time she impressed them with her calm efficiency under fire. Martinez, Blake called out as they prepared to load into the vehicles. You'll be with my squad tonight. We're taking point. Sarah nodded without comment, but inside she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. It was a feeling she had tried to forget, but her body remembered it all too well. The convoy moved through the dark Afghan countryside, their vehicles running silent through villages where windows remained shuttered and streets stayed empty. Sarah sat in the back of the lead vehicle, checking and rechecking her equipment with the practiced movements of someone who had done this many times before. Nervous? Asked Peterson, the team's demolitions expert who sat across from her. No, Sarah replied simply. Peterson studied her face in the green glow of the instrument lights. You should be. First night raid can be intense. Sarah almost smiled at that. If only he knew how many night raids she had been on, how many buildings she had cleared, how many wounded she had treated under enemy fire. But she kept her expression neutral. I'll be fine, she said. When they reached the target building, Blake's hand signals were crisp and clear as he positioned his team. Sarah found herself automatically reading his movements, anticipating the assault plan before he had fully communicated it. She caught herself and forced her mind to focus on her role as medic, not as the soldier she used to be. The building was a 2-story structure on the outskirts of a small village. Intelligence suggested it was being used to store weapons destined for insurgent groups in the region. Blake's team would clear the first floor while another squad took the second. Martinez, you stay with Rodriguez at the entry point until we call clear, Blake instructed. Sarah nodded, but as the team stacked up at the door, her training kicked in. She found herself automatically checking angles, identifying cover positions, and assessing potential escape routes. These were not the thoughts of a medic. The breach was textbook perfect. Flashbang grenades lit up the interior as the SEALs flowed through the doorway like water, each man knowing exactly where to go and what to do. Sarah followed Rodriguez inside, her medical bag ready, her eyes scanning for threats out of pure instinct. The first floor was clear, but gunfire erupted from upstairs. Blake's voice crackled over the radio. Contact second floor, northeast corner room. Rodriguez moved toward the stairs, but a wounded insurgent suddenly appeared from a hidden alcove, raising an AK-47 toward Rodriguez's back. Sarah saw the threat before Rodriguez did. Without thinking, Sarah drew the sidearm she wasn't supposed to be carrying and put two precise round center mass into the insurgent. The man dropped instantly. The shooting stopped. Rodriguez spun around, staring at Sarah in shock. The other SEALs who had witnessed the shooting were equally stunned. "Where the hell did that come from?" Rodriguez whispered. Sarah looked down at the smoking pistol in her hands, realizing what she had just revealed. Her carefully maintained cover as a simple medic had just been blown apart by muscle memory and instinct. Blake appeared at the top of the stairs, having heard the shots. He looked at the dead insurgent, then at Sarah holding the weapon, then back at the insurgent. "Clean shots," he observed quietly. "Center mass, controlled pair. That's military training." Sarah slowly holstered the weapon, her mind racing. She had carried it for protection, telling herself it was just a precaution. But the way she had drawn and fired revealed years of combat experience. She started to say, then stopped. There was no explanation that would maintain her cover story. The rest of the mission proceeded without incident, but the atmosphere had changed. The SEALs looked at Sarah differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She had saved Rodriguez's life with the kind of shooting that only came from extensive combat experience. During the ride back to base, Blake studied Sarah's profile in the darkness. The pieces were starting to come together in his mind. The way she moved, her medical expertise under pressure, her knowledge of weapons and tactics, and now her marksmanship skills. "We need to talk when we get back," Blake said quietly to her. Sarah nodded, knowing that her carefully constructed new life was about to collapse. She had worked so hard to become invisible, to blend into the background as just another contractor trying to make a living. But in one moment of instinct, protecting a teammate, she had revealed the warrior she used to be. Back at base, as the team cleaned their weapons and filed their reports, Sarah sat alone in her quarters staring at the pistol she had used. It was a Sig Sauer P226, the same model she had carried during her previous life. The same model that had been with her during the mission that changed everything. A knock came at her door. She knew it would be Blake, and she knew the conversation that was coming would change everything between her and the team. Some secrets once revealed could never be hidden again. Blake entered Sarah's quarters without waiting for permission. The informal breach of protocol told Sarah everything she needed to know about how seriously he was taking the situation. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. "So," he said simply. "Who are you really?" Sarah remained seated on her cot, the disassembled Sig Sauer spread out on a cloth before her. Her hands moved automatically as she cleaned each component. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of weapons maintenance. "Sarah Martinez, civilian contractor, medical specialist," she replied without looking up. "Cut the crap," Blake said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Rodriguez is alive because you made a shot that most of my SEALs couldn't make under pressure. That kind of marksmanship doesn't come from weekend shooting courses." Sarah assembled the pistol with fluid motions, each click of metal against metal echoing in the small space. When she finished, she finally looked up at Blake. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "I want you to tell me why one of the most competent combat medics I've ever worked with is hiding out here pretending to be a civilian. I want to know why you eat alone, why you never talk about your past, and why you just saved one of my men with shooting that belongs in a sniper's handbook." Sarah stood and moved to the small window, looking out at the base perimeter. In the distance, she could see the mountains where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. "Some stories don't have happy endings," she said quietly. Blake moved closer. "Try me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She had spent 2 years building walls around her past, but Blake's questions and the events of tonight had shattered those barriers. Maybe it was time to stop running. "I was Army Special Forces," she said finally. 18D, Special Forces Medical Sergeant. Blake felt the pieces clicking into place. 18D was one of the most elite medical specialties in the military. These were the medics who went on the most dangerous missions, who kept Special Forces teams alive in impossible situations. "How long?" he asked. 8 years. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, 1 to Somalia. Sarah's voice was flat, clinical. "I was part of a 4-person team. We specialized in deep reconnaissance and direct action missions." She turned from the window to face Blake. "We called ourselves the Night Stalkers. Not very original, but it fit. We went places other teams couldn't go. did things other teams couldn't do. Blake waited, sensing there was more. 2 years ago, we got orders for a mission in the Korangal Valley. Intelligence said there was a high-value target holed up in a compound about 20 kilometers from the nearest friendly forces. The kind of mission we had done dozens of times before. Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she continued. The intel was wrong. It wasn't a safe house. It was a trap. They knew we were coming. She moved to her footlocker and pulled out the worn photograph Blake had glimpsed before. She handed it to him. 4 soldiers in full combat gear smiling at the camera. Sarah was on the left, her arm around a tall blonde woman. That's Amanda Chen, Sarah said, pointing to the woman next to her. Best sniper I ever knew. Could put a bullet through a keyhole at 800 meters. She was also my best friend since basic training. Blake studied the photo. What happened? The compound was surrounded when we arrived. They had been waiting for us for hours, maybe days. We tried to extract, but they had every exit covered. Amanda and our team leader, Sergeant Collins, were hit in the first 5 minutes. Sarah's voice began to crack slightly. I got to Amanda first. Took shrapnel from an IED to her chest and abdomen. I worked on her for 40 minutes while Collins and Martinez, our demolitions expert, same last name as me but no relation, held off the attackers. She sat back down heavily on the cot. I couldn't save her. I had all the training, all the equipment, all the experience, and I couldn't save my best friend. She died in my arms while I was trying to stop the bleeding. Blake remained silent, letting her continue. Collins and Martinez held them off until extraction arrived. But they didn't make it either. I was the only one who walked out of that compound alive. 3 of the best soldiers I ever knew dead because I couldn't do my job well enough. That's not how it works, Blake said firmly. You know that's not how it works. Sometimes people die in combat despite everything we do. Sarah looked up at him with hollow eyes. Do I? Because for 2 years I've been telling myself that. But every time I close my eyes, I see Amanda's face. Every time I hear gunfire, I'm back in that compound. Every time someone gets wounded, I wonder if I'm going to fail them too. She stood and began pacing the small room. After the investigation and the debriefing and the medals ceremony that I didn't want to attend, they offered me a desk job. Said I needed time to process what happened, but I couldn't sit behind a desk knowing that other medics were out there doing the job I was too scared to do anymore. Blake began to understand. So you left the Army, honorable discharge, full benefits. They said I had given enough, served with distinction, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is I ran away. I couldn't face another mission where I might have to watch my teammates die because I wasn't good enough. Sarah stopped pacing and faced Blake directly, so I became a contractor. I told myself it was different, that I was just supporting the mission, not leading it, that if something went wrong, it wouldn't be my responsibility. But tonight changed that, Blake observed. Tonight I acted on instinct. I saw Rodriguez in danger and I reacted the way Amanda trained me to react, the way Collins taught me to react. For a few seconds I was a soldier again instead of a scared contractor hiding from her past. Blake moved closer to her. And how did that feel? Sarah considered the question. Terrifying, but also, right. For the first time in 2 years I felt like myself again. Blake handed the photograph back to her. Your team would be proud of what you did tonight. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. I abandoned everything they taught me about brotherhood, about never leaving a fallen comrade, about being part of something bigger than yourself. I became a ghost, Blake. I stopped being a soldier and became a coward. Bullshit, Blake said firmly. You saved Rodriguez's life tonight. You've been saving lives for 3 months. You didn't abandon anything. You just lost your way for a while. Sarah looked down at the photograph, her thumb tracing Amanda's face. I miss them so much. I miss being part of a team. Miss having people who understood what we do and why we do it. But I'm terrified of caring about people again because what if I lose them too? Blake was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. What if you don't? The next morning brought an uncomfortable tension to the base. Word of Sarah's shooting had spread through the SEAL team, and she could feel their eyes on her as she made her rounds. The easy professional distance she had maintained was gone, replaced by curiosity and a grudging respect that made her feel exposed. Rodriguez sought her out first, finding her in the medical tent as she inventoried supplies. Hey, he said awkwardly, standing in the doorway. I wanted to thank you for last night. Sarah didn't look up from her clipboard. Just doing my job. No, you weren't, Rodriguez said, stepping into the tent. Your job is to patch us up after we get shot, not to keep us from getting shot in the first place." He paused, then continued. "I've been thinking about what you said about my sister, about worrying whether she's strong enough instead of whether she's a woman." Sarah finally looked at him. Rodriguez was young, maybe 25, with earnest brown eyes and the kind of optimism that came from never losing anyone who truly mattered. "Your sister sounds like she knows her own mind," Sarah said carefully. "Yeah, she does, always has. I guess I've been treating her like she's still the little girl who used to cry when I left for deployment." Rodriguez shifted his weight from foot to foot. "The thing is, after seeing you last night, I realized that maybe the Army would be lucky to have her." Before Sarah could respond, Davis and Peterson appeared in the doorway. The tent suddenly felt very crowded. "We wanted to talk to you," Peterson said. "About last night." Sarah tensed. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing that her carefully constructed identity as a simple contractor was completely blown. "Look," Davis began, "we know you're not just some civilian medic. That shooting, the way you moved, the way you handled yourself, that's not something you learn in contractor training. We don't need to know the details," Peterson added quickly, "but we want you to know that whatever brought you here, you're part of this team now. What you did for Rodriguez, that's brotherhood. That's what we do for each other." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. The easy acceptance in their voices reminded her painfully of her old team, of the bonds she had left behind. "I'm not military anymore," she said quietly. "Doesn't matter," Rodriguez said firmly. "Once a soldier, always a soldier. The uniform doesn't make you what you are, your actions do." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself reluctantly drawn into the team's conversations. They didn't push for details about her past, but they began including her in their plans and discussions in a way they hadn't before. The isolation she had maintained so carefully began to crumble. Blake watched the changes with interest. Sarah was still guarded, still carrying whatever pain had driven her to become a contractor, but she was beginning to engage with his men in a way that spoke to her military background. It was during a briefing for their next mission that Sarah's expertise became truly apparent. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander operating out of a remote mountain village. The approach would be treacherous, the extraction complicated, and the medical support critical given the distance from base. "The LZ is here," Blake said, pointing to a spot on the map about 2 kilometers from the target village. "We'll have to move on foot through this terrain to reach the objective." Sarah studied the map, her trained eye immediately identifying problems with the plan. Without thinking, she spoke up. "That approach exposes you to sniper fire from these ridgelines," she said, pointing to several elevated positions. "And this valley here creates a natural ambush point. If they know you're coming, it's a kill box." The room went quiet. Blake looked at her with interest. "What would you suggest?" Sarah realized she had just done exactly what she had been trying to avoid, revealing her tactical knowledge. But the words were already out, and lives were at stake. "Here," she said, pointing to a different route. "It's longer, but it keeps you in defilade from the high ground. You approach from the north, where the terrain provides natural cover. And for extraction, instead of going back to the original LZ, you move to this position here. It's further from the target, but it's defensible if things go wrong." Blake studied the alternative route. It was tactically sound, showing a level of expertise that went beyond medical training. "How do you know this terrain?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then made a decision. "Because I've been there before. Different mission, same area. 2 years ago." The admission hung in the air. Sarah had just confirmed what they all suspected. She wasn't just former military, she was former special forces. "What else do we need to know about this area?" Blake asked, treating her like the tactical expert she clearly was. Sarah took a deep breath. "The village has 3 main approaches. The one you're planning is the most obvious, which means it's probably watched. The northern route I showed you is better, but it requires crossing this stream here, which could be a problem if the water level is high," she continued, her tactical knowledge flowing despite her reservations. "The compound you're targeting sits on elevated ground with good sight lines in all directions. If your target is smart, he'll have early warning systems in place. You'll Need to neutralize those before you move on the primary objective. Davis leaned forward. Sounds like you know a lot about how this guy thinks. I know how people think when they're trying to stay alive in hostile territory, Sarah replied. Same way we think. Blake made notes on the map based on Sarah's input. This is good intel. It changes our approach significantly. There's something else, Sarah said reluctantly. That village, it's not just a Taliban stronghold. There are civilians there, families who are trapped between supporting the Taliban and protecting their children. Any assault needs to account for non-combatants. The concern in her voice was genuine, and Blake could see that she was struggling with something deeper than tactical considerations. You sound like you've seen what happens when civilians get caught in crossfire, he observed. Sarah's face went pale. Yeah, I have. She stood abruptly. If that's all you need, I should check on the medical supplies for the mission. As she moved toward the door, Blake called after her. Martinez, we could use someone with your experience on this mission, not just as a medic but as a tactical advisor. Sarah stopped but didn't turn around. I'm not qualified for that anymore. Based on what I just heard, you're the most qualified person in this room. Sarah finally turned back. You don't understand, Blake. The last time I was in that area, people died because I couldn't do my job. I won't be responsible for that happening again. She left the tent, leaving the SEALs staring after her. Blake looked down at the map, noting how much better their plan was with Sarah's input. Whatever had happened to her in that valley, it was clear that her expertise could save lives on this mission. But he also understood that she was terrified of the responsibility that expertise represented. The question was whether she could overcome that fear in time to help them succeed. That evening, Sarah sat alone outside the base perimeter, staring up at the star-filled Afghan sky. The desert air was cool against her face, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of generators and the occasional radio chatter from the guard posts. She pulled out her satellite phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 months. After several rings, a familiar voice answered. Sarah, Jesus, I was wondering when you'd call. Hey, Marcus, she said quietly. Marcus Williams had been her commanding officer during her final year in Special Forces. The man who had signed her discharge papers and watched her walk away from everything she had ever known. How are you holding up out there? Sarah looked back toward the base where she could see the SEALs preparing for their mission. I think I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? The kind where I might get people killed. Sarah told him about the mission briefing, about revealing her tactical knowledge, about Blake's request for her to serve as an advisor. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You know that valley, don't you? That's where it happened. Yeah. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I can't go back there, Marcus. I can't be responsible for another team in that place. Sarah, listen to me, Marcus said firmly. What happened to Amanda and the others wasn't your fault. You know that, right? I couldn't save them. You weren't supposed to save them. You were supposed to do your job, which you did. The mission report was clear. You kept that team fighting for 40 minutes against overwhelming odds. You extracted critical intelligence that saved dozens of lives in subsequent operations. You performed exactly as trained. Sarah closed her eyes. Then why does it feel like I failed them? Because you love them. Because they were your family and families aren't supposed to leave each other behind. But Sarah, you didn't leave them behind. They died doing the job they chose to do, protecting something they believed in, and you survived to carry on their mission. I ran away, Marcus. I became a contractor and hid from everything we stood for. You took time to heal. There's a difference. But now you're in a position to use everything they taught you to save other lives. Amanda would kick your ass if she knew you were sitting this one out because you're scared. Sarah almost smiled at that. Amanda Chen had been the most fearless person she had ever known. Someone who would run toward danger if it meant protecting her team. These SEALs, Marcus continued, they trust you. That doesn't happen by accident. They've seen something in you that maybe you've forgotten about yourself. After ending the call, Sarah walked back through the base. She could see Blake's team in the briefing tent going over the mission plan one more time. Through the canvas walls, she could hear Rodriguez asking questions about medical evacuation procedures, Peterson discussing demolition requirements, and Davis coordinating communications protocols. They sounded like her old team. Professional, dedicated, willing to risk everything for each other and the mission. the kind of soldiers Amanda would have respected. Sarah made a decision. She walked into the briefing tent, interrupting the conversation. All eyes turned to her. "I want to go with you," she said simply. Blake looked up from the map. "As medical support?" "As whatever you need me to be. Medical support, tactical advisor, extra gun. You're going into my old area of operations, and you could use someone who knows the terrain." "Sarah," Blake said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but if you're not ready—" "I'll never be ready," she interrupted. "But that doesn't mean I shouldn't go. These men are willing to risk their lives on this mission. The least I can do is risk mine alongside them." Rodriguez grinned. "Does this mean you'll finally eat dinner with us instead of sitting alone in the corner?" Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. "Don't push it." Blake studied her face, looking for any sign of hesitation or doubt. What he saw was fear, yes, but also determination. The kind of resolve that came from making peace with difficult decisions. "All right," he said, "but you follow my orders out there. No heroics, no trying to prove anything. You're part of this team now, which means you don't take unnecessary risks." "Understood." Over the next 2 hours, they modified the mission plan to incorporate Sarah's knowledge of the area. She provided detailed information about patrol routes, defensive positions, and local tactics that intelligence had missed. Her input transformed their approach from a standard assault to a precisely planned operation that accounted for every variable she could remember. "One more thing," Sarah said as they finalized the plan. "The compound you're targeting, it's not just a command post. The Taliban commander you're after, he's been using it as a safe house for his family. His wife and 2 young children live there." The information changed everything. What had been planned as a direct assault would now require careful consideration of civilian casualties. "How do you know this?" Blake asked. "Because 2 years ago my team was supposed to capture him alive for interrogation. We had spent weeks studying his patterns, his family, his habits. He's smart, careful, and he uses his family as both human shields and early warning systems." Blake nodded grimly. "Changes the approach significantly." "It should," Sarah said firmly. "Those children didn't choose this life. Whatever happens to their father, they deserve to survive it." As the briefing concluded and the team dispersed to prepare their equipment, Blake pulled Sarah aside. "Are you sure about this? Going back to that place?" Sarah looked at the map one more time, her finger tracing the route that would take them past the compound where her old team had died. "No," she said honestly, "but Amanda used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Smart woman. The smartest." She also used to say that the dead don't stay dead if the living carry on their mission. Sarah folded the map and handed it back to Blake. "Maybe it's time I started carrying it again." That night, as Sarah packed her gear for the mission, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, the sense of being part of something larger than herself. The equipment felt familiar in her hands, the weight of responsibility familiar on her shoulders. She pulled out the photograph of her old team one more time, studying their faces in the dim light of her quarters. "I'm going back," she whispered to the image. "I'm going to do what you taught me to do." For the first time since their deaths, she felt like Amanda, Collins, and Martinez would approve of her choices. Tomorrow, she would return to the place where her old life had ended, but maybe, just maybe, it was also where her new life could truly begin. The helicopter touched down in the pre-dawn darkness, its rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she stepped onto the rocky ground of the landing zone. She was back in the Korengal Valley, the place where her nightmares had been born. Blake's team moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter, while the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. Sarah shouldered her pack, feeling the familiar weight of combat gear and medical supplies, but this time she also carried additional equipment. Tactical radios, ammunition, and specialized medical gear that went beyond standard contractor supplies. "You good?" Blake asked quietly as they began their approach march. Sarah nodded, though she could feel the ghosts of her past walking alongside her. Every rock formation, every ridge line, every shadow looked familiar. This terrain had been mapped into her memory through weeks of reconnaissance and planning, and now it felt like stepping back into a recurring nightmare. The team moved in tactical formation through the mountain passes, with Sarah positioned between Blake and Rodriguez. Her role was officially medical support, but Blake had made it clear that her tactical knowledge would be crucial to mission success. 2 hours into the march, Sarah raised her hand in a halt signal. The team immediately dropped into defensive positions, weapons oriented outward while Blake moved to her position. "What is it?" he whispered. Sarah pointed to a ridgeline about 400 meters ahead. "Observation post. There's a small cave system up there that provides perfect overwatch of this entire valley. If they're watching the approaches, that's where they'll be." Blake studied the position through his scope. "I don't see anything. You won't during the day. They move at night, set up before dawn, and wait. During my previous mission, we spent 3 days mapping their surveillance network. That position is occupied." Blake made a decision. "Peterson, Davis, flank left and neutralize that position. Rodriguez, you're with me and Martinez. We'll hold here until it's clear." As Peterson and Davis began their approach, Sarah felt the familiar anxiety of combat operations. But this time, instead of being paralyzed by memories of failure, she found herself focused on the mission and the safety of her current team. "Contact," came Peterson's voice over the radio 20 minutes later. "2 enemy KIA, position secure." The team resumed their advance with Sarah's knowledge of the terrain guiding their route selection. She directed them around known ambush positions, through paths that provided concealment from observation, and past areas where her old team had encountered resistance. "How much further?" Rodriguez asked as they paused to check their position. Sarah consulted her map and GPS. "About 2 kilometers to the target compound. But we need to be careful here. This section of the valley is where—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Where what?" Blake prompted gently. "Where my old team was ambushed. The compound they were targeting was about 800 meters from our current objective. The Taliban will have learned from that engagement." As if summoned by her words, the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed through the valley. But it wasn't directed at them. It was coming from the direction of their target. "Shit," Blake muttered. "They're engaging someone else." Sarah listened to the pattern of gunfire, her trained ear distinguishing between different weapon systems. AK-47s, PKM machine gun, and at least one sniper with a Dragunov. Whoever they're fighting, they're outgunned. "Could be another coalition unit," Davis suggested over the radio. "Or it could be a diversion," Sarah said grimly. "The Taliban commander we're after is smart. He might be using his fighters to draw attention away from his position while he escapes." Blake made a quick decision. "We move to overwatch position and assess. If it's friendlies under fire, we provide support. If it's a diversion, we continue to primary objective." The team advanced to a ridgeline that provided visual confirmation of the target area. Through their scopes, they could see the compound where the Taliban commander was believed to be hiding. It looked exactly as Sarah remembered from her intelligence briefings 2 years ago. But about half a kilometer away, they could see the source of the gunfire. A small coalition patrol was pinned down by enemy fire, trapped in the open with minimal cover. 4 men, Blake observed through his scope. "Looks like they're cut off from their extraction point." Sarah studied the tactical situation. The pinned patrol was in exactly the same position her old team had been in during their final mission. The same terrain, the same enemy tactics, the same desperate situation. "We have to help them," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Blake looked at her, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. "Sarah, our mission—" "The mission can wait. Those men are going to die if we don't do something." Blake weighed the options. Helping the patrol would expose their position and potentially compromise their primary objective. But leaving coalition forces to die was not an option any of them could live with. "All right, Peterson, Davis, you have the high ground. Provide overwatch and sniper support. Rodriguez, you're with me for direct assault. Martinez." "I'm going with you," Sarah said firmly. "Sarah, your job is medical support, not assault. My job is to keep this team alive and complete the mission. Right now, that means all of us." She checked her weapon and adjusted her gear. "Besides, I know this terrain better than anyone. You'll need me up there." Blake studied her face, seeing determination where once there had been hesitation. "Stay close and follow my lead." The assault team moved down from their position, using Sarah's knowledge of the terrain to approach the enemy positions from an unexpected angle. As they moved, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. The calm focus of a soldier in combat, trusting her training and her teammates. "In position," Blake whispered into his radio. "Copy," came Peterson's reply. "I have eyes on 3 enemy positions." "Engaging on your signal." Sarah could see the trapped patrol about 200 meters away. They were wounded, running low on ammunition, and fighting for their lives. It was exactly the situation her old team had faced, but this time, she was in a position to do something about it. "Martinez," Blake said quietly, "when we move, you stay with the wounded. Let us handle the fighting." Sarah shook her head. "With respect, sir, I'm not just a medic anymore. Amanda taught me to fight, Collins taught me to lead, and Martinez taught me to never leave a fallen comrade. Today I'm all three." Blake looked into her eyes and saw something that hadn't been there before. The confidence of a soldier who had found her way home. "All right," he said. "Let's bring them home." The assault began with Peterson's precise rifle fire from the ridgeline. 2 enemy fighters dropped instantly, their positions exposed by muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness. Blake and Rodriguez moved fast and low across the rocky terrain, while Sarah flanked left toward the trapped patrol. The familiar rhythm of combat flowed through Sarah's body like muscle memory returning after a long absence. Move, shoot, communicate, move again. Everything Amanda had taught her about fire and movement. Everything Collins had drilled into her about tactical thinking. Everything her old team had believed about never leaving anyone behind. "Friendly forces," Sarah called out as she approached the pinned patrol. "U.S. Army coming to assist." The patrol leader, a young lieutenant with blood streaming down his face, looked up in surprise. "Where the hell did you come from?" "Long story," Sarah replied, sliding into cover beside him. "What's your status?" 2 wounded, 1 critical. We're almost out of ammo, and they've got us zeroed from 3 positions." Sarah quickly assessed the wounded soldiers. One had taken shrapnel to his leg, painful but not life-threatening. The other had been hit in the chest and was struggling to breathe. "Tension pneumothorax," she diagnosed quickly, pulling out her medical kit. "I need to decompress his chest or he's going to die." As she worked on the wounded soldier, Blake and Rodriguez continued their assault on the enemy positions. The coordinated attack from multiple angles had disrupted the Taliban's defensive plan, forcing them to divide their attention. "1 down," Rodriguez reported over the radio, moving to 2nd position. Sarah inserted a needle into the wounded soldier's chest, releasing the trapped air that was preventing his lung from expanding. Immediately his breathing improved and his color began to return. "Better?" she asked. The soldier nodded weakly. "Much better. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still need to get you out of here." The gunfire was intensifying as more Taliban fighters responded to the attack. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from positions that hadn't been active before, indicating that reinforcements were arriving. "Blake," she called into her radio, "we've got more fighters moving in from the north. This is about to get a lot more complicated." "Copy. How long do you need with the wounded?" Sarah looked at the 3 injured soldiers. The chest wound was stabilized but needed immediate evacuation. The leg wound could be managed in the field. The 3rd man had a concussion but was mobile. 5 minutes to get them stable for movement, she replied. "You've got 3. Sarah worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed combat medicine under the worst possible conditions, but as she treated the wounded, she became aware of something that had been missing from her life for 2 years. The absolute trust of soldiers, who knew she would not let them down. "You've done this before," the lieutenant observed as Sarah bandaged his head wound. "Once or twice," she replied. Peterson's voice crackled over the radio. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Looks like technical trucks with mounted weapons. We need to move now." Blake made the tactical decision that would define the next few minutes. "All units fighting withdrawal to Rally Point Alpha. Martinez, can your wounded move?" Sarah looked at the 3 injured soldiers. The chest wound would need support, but he could walk. The others were mobile. Affirmative. Were moving. What followed was a textbook fighting withdrawal, with each team element providing covering fire while the others moved. Sarah found herself naturally falling into the rhythm she had learned with her old team, anticipating movements, coordinating with Blake and Rodriguez, trusting Peterson and Davis to provide overwatch. But this time was different. This time, instead of watching her teammates die, she was watching them execute a perfect extraction under fire. Instead of feeling helpless, she felt like an integral part of a functioning unit. Contact left. Rodriguez called out as Taliban fighters tried to flank their withdrawal route. Sarah, supporting the wounded soldier with the chest injury, found herself in the line of fire. Without thinking, she pushed the wounded man behind cover and returned fire with her rifle, her shots precise and controlled. "Nice shooting," Rodriguez called out as two attackers dropped. The team reached the rally point, a defensive position that provided cover while they called for extraction. Sarah immediately went to work on the wounded, establishing an IV line for the chest wound and rechecking all her previous work. "Medevac inbound," Blake announced. 10 minutes out. As they waited, Sarah found herself looking back toward the valley where her old team had died. The same mountains, the same terrain, the same enemy. But this time, everyone was going home. "You did good out there," the wounded lieutenant said to her. "What unit are you with?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled. "I'm with these guys," she said, indicating Blake's team. Blake overheard and moved closer. "How are our patients?" "They'll make it. The chest wound needs surgery, but he's stable for transport. The others will be fine with rest and antibiotics." "And how are you?" Sarah considered the question. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. Not the broken contractor who ate alone and avoided connections, but the soldier Amanda had trained, the medic Collins had trusted, the teammate Martinez had counted on. "I'm good," she said, and meant it. The medevac helicopter appeared on the horizon, its distinctive sound cutting through the morning air. As they prepared the wounded for transport, Rodriguez approached Sarah. "So," he said, "does this mean you'll finally tell us your story?" Sarah looked around at the team. Blake coordinating the extraction, Peterson and Davis maintaining security, Rodriguez helping with the wounded. These men had accepted her, trusted her, and fought alongside her without demanding explanations or apologies for her past. "Maybe," she said, "over dinner, but I'm buying." As the helicopter lifted off with the wounded soldiers, Blake gathered his team for the final phase of their original mission. The Taliban commander was still in the compound and their job wasn't finished. "Ready to complete this mission?" Blake asked. Sarah checked her weapon and adjusted her gear. In the distance, she could see the compound where their target waited. It was less than a kilometer from where her old team had died. But instead of feeling haunted by their memory, she felt empowered by their legacy. "Let's finish this," she said. As the team moved toward their objective, Sarah realized that Amanda, Collins, and Martinez hadn't died in vain. Their sacrifice had taught her that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, and worth living for. Brotherhood, honor, the belief that no one gets left behind. She had spent 2 years running from those lessons, but now she understood that carrying their memory didn't mean carrying their guilt. It meant carrying their mission forward, protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves, and never abandoning the family that chose to stand beside her. Sarah Martinez was finally home. The compound raid was swift and successful. The Taliban commander was captured alive, valuable intelligence was recovered, and Blake's team returned to base without casualties. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the mission success. It was the realization that healing didn't mean forgetting, and moving forward didn't mean leaving the past behind. That evening, for the first time in 2 years, Sarah Martinez sat down to dinner with her teammates, ready to tell her story and begin writing a new chapter of her life.